Welcome to the deep dive, where we take these huge, complex stacks of information and really try to distill them into the patterns that actually matter.
And today, we are going deep. I mean, really deep.
We are. Today we're undertaking a deep dive that, well, it goes beyond history or literature or even just psychology. We're trying to look at the foundational structures of reality itself.
Right. It's like we're trying to find the operating system that's running underneath everything, the code that seems to be running cultural narratives, biological processes.
And even fundamental physics. It's a huge claim.
It's maybe the most ambitious mission we've ever tackled. We are taking archetypes, the hero, the trickster, the mentor, and pulling them out of mythology.
And placing them where, exactly?
Squarely into the world of complex systems theory, into dynamic physics, cognitive science. The key here is that we're not just looking for, nice metaphors.
No, we're looking for the real deal.
We're searching for the underlying, abstract, almost mathematical bridge structures that genuinely link something as, well, spiritual as a hero's journey to something as concrete as a particle crossing an energy barrier.
Okay, let's unpack that central claim right from the get-go. We've got sources here suggesting that myths and archetypes aren't just great stories, which they are, or even just cultural universals.
No, there's something more fundamental. They're stable patterns.
Stable patterns. In, technical language, what really defines that stability?
Okay, so in the language of dynamic systems, which is really the language we need today, we'd call them attractors.
Attractors.
Think of an attractor as a fixed point, or maybe a stable cycle. It's a configuration that any complex system will naturally tend toward over time.
So it's like a default setting for reality.
In a way, yeah. If you introduce perturbation or noise or just random variation into a system, it doesn't matter if it's a society or a brain or even a story structure, it will over time kind of relax back into certain preferred robust patterns.
So the reason the hero's journey sticks around for thousands of years across totally different cultures, it's not necessarily because of some, mystical collective unconscious.
It might be, but the structural reason is that the pattern itself, that sequence of events, is just incredibly efficient and robust against variation.
It's structurally sound, like a well-built bridge.
Precisely. It's like a deep valley in a topographical map.
Yeah.
No matter where you start on the hillsides, you're probably going to end up in the valley. Systems just tend to settle there.
So to analyze these patterns across all these different domains, from cosmology to, comedy, we need a common language.
We do. And the sources propose a really elegant framework. It's built on just 3 core simple elements that can define any system that's capable of changing and persisting.
All right, hit me with the framework. This is the STM structure, right?
Yes. So first you have state S. It's simply the configuration of the system at any given moment, a snapshot.
A snapshot. So in psychology, that would be my current mental and emotional status.
Exactly. Or in a culture, it's the prevailing social setup, the laws, the norms. In physics, it's the exact position, momentum, and internal configuration of a particle or a field. It's the what.
So what? Okay, so then what's the how? How does it change?
That's the second part, transformation T. This is the rule or the force that causes a change in the state.
So, a life event, a plot twist.
It could be. It could be a codified ritual, a traumatic life event, a plot step in a story, or a fundamental physical force like gravity or the flow of energy. T is just the process that moves the system from state S to a new state S prime.
Got it. And the third piece, which you said is the most crucial one, the one that selects which of these patterns actually survive, that's the measure or invariance.
Absolutely critical. M is the quality that selects, preserves, or filters a pattern.
Yeah.
You have to ask the question, why does this specific structure stick around and not another one?
And the answer is?
It's because it preserves something important. It might preserve meaning, or it maximizes adaptive utility like survival or getting resources. Or it could be that it just reduces our cognitive load. It's easy to think with.
And in physics?
In physics, M is what conserves energy or momentum or a specific symmetry. M is basically the evolutionary pressure that gets applied to the narrative or the physical system or whatever you're looking at.
Wow. Okay, so an archetype, like the trickster or the mentor.
Right.
It's just a reusable sequence, a simple loop or a hierarchy.
That's it.
That is consistently selected by this M filter because it's adaptive, it's easy for our brains to compress, and it's emotionally charged.
You've got it. It's a high-efficiency pattern recognition tool for navigating existence.
Archetypes are nature's favorite shortcuts.
That's the core insight, really. They are the computationally least expensive way we have to model incredibly complex human interactions and systemic transitions.
All right, let's dedicate some serious time to this. Part 1. The blueprint of universal patterns and cognitive compression.
Let's do it. We have to start with those foundational concepts from dynamic systems and math, because these are the true bridge structures.
If we can really get our heads around things like attractors, bifurcations, and symmetry breaking, then the leak from myth to physics starts to feel, well, intuitive, not just like a neat metaphor.
Exactly. Let's start by revisiting the attractor, the stable narrative. We sort of defined it already. In physics, a system will naturally tend toward a fixed point or a stable cycle.
A state of minimal energy or maximum stability.
Sure.
So if I start playing a random sequence of musical notes and just let that system evolve, it's highly probable it will eventually resolve itself into, say, a major or minor key.
Because those chord structures are the musical attractors.
Right. They're stable, they resolve tension efficiently. And the same way, if you try to write a story about a conflict, the structure of the hero is like a gravitational well, just pulling the plot toward that stable shape.
That's a perfect analogy. The robustness of the hero archetype means that even if a storyteller consciously tries to avoid it, they usually end up creating a pattern that is what we'd call topologically similar.
Because it's what works. It maximizes interpretation and memory retrieval for the audience. Our brains are built to receive that signal.
Exactly. Okay, next up, bifurcation. We map this one to rites of passage. Can you ground this for us in a simple physical reality before we take it to culture?
Sure. I mean, the classic example is water, isn't it?
It is. Imagine you have water. As the temperature slowly rises, that's your changing parameter, the state remains totally stable. It's liquid. That's an attractor.
But then you get to 100 degrees Celsius.
And a very, very small change right past that point leads to a sudden qualitative shift in behavior. It becomes steam.
It's not just more liquid or hotter liquid. It is fundamentally structurally different.
And that critical temperature point is the bifurcation.
That makes the cultural analogy so powerful. The transition to adulthood or a crisis like losing your job or a spiritual awakening. It's not a slow, continuous change. It's a sharp transition point.
Suddenly you are operating under a completely new set of social or psychological rules.
In stories, the call to adventure is often that moment, isn't it? The moment the bifurcation parameter, the external pressure, crosses that critical threshold.
It forces the system out of its current stable state. The individual, the hero, must adopt a qualitatively new behavior or role just to survive the transition.
Okay, but I have a critical question here. In a physical system like water, that phase change is predictable. Water becomes steam. But in a rite of passage, how does the system, the individual, know which new state, which new attractor to settle into?
That's a fantastic question.
How do we ensure that a crisis leads to, say, maturity and not just a complete collapse into chaos?
And that is where the transformation T rules become absolutely critical. They're often supplied by the cultural context, by ritual.
Ah, so the ritual is like a guide wire.
It's a guide wire during the unstable phase, yes. A culture provides a codified map for that transition, which maximizes the probability that the system settles into the adaptively beneficial new attractor, A1, maturity, rather than just collapsing.
That's fascinating. The ritual is the steering mechanism for navigating a mathematical bifurcation point. Okay, let's move to symmetry. This translates to binary polarities.
So in group theory, symmetry means an object or structure remains unchanged even after you put it through a transformation.
Like rotating a square by 90 degrees, it still looks like the same square.
Exactly. And in culture, binary polarities like good versus evil, sacred versus profane, or order versus chaos, they provide meaning because they conserve the relationship between the two elements.
So when a transformation happens, let's say an evil empire is defeated and replaced by a good one, the underlying relationship of, say, power opposing weakness is actually preserved, even if the specific characters filling those roles change.
Yes. The structure itself is invariant.
And that structural invariance is what provides the meaning, the measure, M, that makes the archetype so cognitively useful. It gives us a stable framework for categorizing the world.
You've got it. And that brings us to the last one, the conserved quantity. In physics, if a system is isolated, energy is conserved, momentum is conserved. What's the equivalent conservation law in a story or in a culture?
Preserved meaning.
Preserved meaning. It's the symbolic kernel. Take the concept of sacrifice. The specific way sacrifice happens in different stories varies wildly, right? Someone sacrifices their job, their relationship, their life savings.
I like.
Right. But the core symbolic idea, the concept of giving something of irreplaceable high value for a collective or future good, that is the invariant quantity across the entire system.
That's what has to be conserved for the story to function and to resonate with us in an adaptive way.
So when you're reading a story, your brain is subconsciously running a check. It's testing the conservation laws. Did that sacrifice conserve enough meaning to actually justify the transformation that followed?
And if the meaning is conserved, the structure is accepted as valid. It becomes a template for how we interpret things in the future.
Precisely.
So if these archetypes aren't just invented, if they're emergent properties of complex systems, there must be a simple, reusable grammar that produces them. Let's walk through that four-step generative cycle.
Okay, step one is absolutely essential. Variation. In any adaptive system, you have to have a source of noise, of mutation.
A random potential pool.
Right. Individuals, storytellers, genes. They're constantly recombining existing elements, these motifs, in 1,000 different ways.
Then comes step two, the critical filter. Filtering and selection. This is where M comes in and is just ruthless.
Yes, it ruthlessly cuts the noise. The patterns that survive are the ones that meet a minimum standard of efficiency. Are they easy to remember? That's cognitive ease.
Do they elicit a strong unifying response in the group?
That's emotional charge. And do they help the group solve coordination problems? That's adaptive utility. Only the most efficient patterns get selected and retained.
So they survive because they're computationally cheap and socially effective.
Then you get to step three, which is stabilization. Once a pattern is selected, repetition, often in the form of, ritualization or just habitual storytelling, it creates these deep attractors in our memory and in our social practices.
So it moves from being a random event to a predictable structure. It becomes the hero's journey or the trickster tale.
And finally, step four, generalization. This is where a specific story becomes the abstract archetype.
The symbols abstract away from this specific instance. It's no longer about this one dragon in this one cave.
Exactly. It becomes the abstract vector of danger plus power plus greed plus primordial chaos. These archetypes become abstract vectors that you can then embed into totally new contexts.
The sources call this semantic embedding, right?
Yes, you can project the dragon vector onto a corporate merger, a new technological threat, or an internal psychological battle. The abstract structure remains functional across all those domains.
So if this grammar is always running, why does it always seem to produce the same basic structural patterns? Whether we're looking at an ancient Sumerian myth or, the training algorithm of a modern AI, what are the root causes of this universality?
It really seems to spring from 4 conversion drivers, and they're all rooted in necessity. The first is just raw cognitive compression.
Our brain's hardware limits.
Precisely. We are computationally limited beings, and we're facing this overwhelming flood of raw data every second. We desperately need simple prototypes, archetypes to categorize the world and reduce the memory cost of just interacting with it.
So they're the ultimate compression algorithm for socio-psychological reality.
Yeah.
High-fidelity models built from low-fidelity, messy inputs.
The second driver is social coherence. Myths and rituals, they act as powerful synchronization tools. They're like collective coordination games.
If everyone in the group agrees on what a hero is and what the rules are and what evil looks like,
then the group can act together much more efficiently. They solve collective action problems, like establishing a hierarchy or legitimizing how resources get distributed.
third, you've got their adaptive functions.
Right. Many myths literally encode survival rules, taboos that protect necessary resources or guide successful cooperation. These patterns are what you might call mimetically smothering. They encourage you to adhere to them, and they punish deviation.
Which gives the culture an evolutionary advantage.
And the final one brings us right back to pure structural math. Mathematical robustness.
This feels key.
It is. Patterns that are topologically simple structures like loops, trees, simple bifurcations, they are inherently robust against noise and systemic errors. In a chaotic world, the structures that survive have to be the simplest and most stable ones.
They're the geometric shapes that resist decay and perturbation.
Which is why they emerge universally, whether you're looking at crystalline structures or ancient narratives.
Okay, let's move from those foundational concepts to the primary agents. The characters or operators that drive this universal cycle of order to chaos to a new order. These three are not just characters, they're systemic operators.
Absolutely. We have to start with the hero.
The hero, the universal adaptation loop.
The hero is the most famous attractor, and we have to define him abstractly. The hero is the universal algorithm for learning and adaptation.
So the journey itself is a robust sequence between these attractors we talked about. You start at A0, order home.
Then you have separation, which is S, the unstable saddle point. Then transformation, which is A1, the new stable configuration. And finally, return and integration.
That separation phase, the crossing of the threshold, that's the unstable saddle. That's the moment the whole system is most sensitive to input and most likely to collapse.
It is, which explains why so many narrative heroes feel that crippling doubt at that exact moment.
Because they're at the point of maximum instability.
Precisely. It represents the highest energy state required before the system can relax into a new, lower energy minimum. Let's really drill into the cross-domain mappings here to prove this is a universal structure.
Okay, lay it out. How does this manifest in physics?
In physics, it's the requirement for activation energy. A particle might be in a stable, but maybe not optimal state, that's A0. But to transition to a truly stable state, A1, it first has to overcome an energy barrier.
It has to be perturbed. That's the call to adventure.
Right. And it has to spend energy, that's the trial, to get over that barrier, after which it relaxes into the new configuration, and the whole process has to follow a path of minimal action.
The most efficient route possible for the transformation.
Even when from the inside the journey feels like maximum effort. That tension is fascinating.
It is. Okay, what about in biology?
Think of metamorphosis. The larval stage, the caterpillar, that's A0, it's stable. But then hormonal signals, or the transformation rules. T drive the system into the unstable pupal state, the chrysalis, the separation.
It's a period of chaos. It's literally dissolving.
Yes, and that chaotic period is necessary to rewrite the system's programming. That's what leads to the emergence of the butterfly, A1, which is a qualitatively new, mature, and stable state. It's an unavoidable journey toward a new, higher level of functional equilibrium.
In psychology, this is the therapeutic process itself, isn't it? You leave your old, safe, but maybe limiting psychological patterns. That's home. You go through the painful struggle of grief or identity loss, separation, and trial.
And you emerge as an integrated larger self, the transformation.
And even in technology or AI, this structure is just unavoidable.
Totally. A deep learning algorithm starts with a poor initial policy, a bad set of guesses, that's A0. The training cycles are the trials and updates, constantly perturbing the system to find the path of minimal error.
Until it converges to an optimized, better policy. A1.
The hero is simply the narrative interpretation of a successful optimization routine.
So the generative mechanism is fixed. Systems will naturally move toward a new equilibrium when they're perturbed, and they'll follow the path of minimal action. The hero is the bridge between the old order and the new. Let's make that psychological journey really concrete.
Okay, consider an entrepreneur. They've had this one business for years. It's their identity. That's A0. Then they lose it.
The loss is the separation, the trigger event, the threshold crossing.
They enter a period of chaotic self-doubt, frantic searching. That's the trial. They're on that unstable saddle point. If they adapt, they don't just restart the old business.
No, a true transformation means they acquire new values. They integrate the lessons of that failure.
They define a fundamentally new professional identity. That is the transformation A1. They return to the market as a new, larger, more resilient entity. It's the same exact structure you see in every mythic hero.
Okay, so if the hero creates the new order by adapting to change, what about the trickster? Their function seems to be to create the change in the first place by dismantling the stagnant old order. They are chaos, but strategically applied.
Perfectly put. The trickster is the symmetry breaker. They are an operator of nonlinear local disturbance. Their function isn't just to cause trouble, but to expose the hidden assumptions in the system's rule set.
Assumptions that were protected by symmetry.
Right. They reveal that the current rules are only one possible solution set, not the only one.
That's a really critical differentiation. A symmetric state is stable and safe, but it's fundamentally blind to possibilities that exist outside of its own rules. The trickster exposes those blind spots.
If the system is perfectly balanced, he just tips the scale to see what falls out.
So what are the cross-domain mappings here?
In physics, we have spontaneous symmetry breaking. It's crucial in particle physics. It's when a field shifts from a symmetric to an asymmetric state under critical conditions, which leads to the emergence of mass or new forces. The trickster is actively driving that kind of shift in the cultural landscape.
And in biology?
The trickster is mutation, or the mechanism for horizontal gene transfer. It's introducing novel genetic information that disrupts the established phenotype, but it's what allows for radical evolutionary leaps. It's the source of beneficial variation.
Culturally, the trickster is satire, parody, subversion, figures like Loki or even Bugs Bunny.
They expose hypocrisy and challenge norms by acting outside the established laws, which forces society to re-examine what it holds as sacred or inviolable.
And cognitively, it's that sudden, strange leap of creative insight, the aha moment that just defies conventional logic and breaks old thought patterns to reveal a novel solution. It often feels like you had to break a rule to solve the problem.
And the generative mechanism is rooted in information theory and efficiency. In systems where repetition leads to rigidity to stagnation, low-cost perturbations that yield a high information return are incredibly valuable.
So cultures tolerate the trickster, the fool, the comedian in controlled niches like the carnival or the stage because they're a necessary source of managed evolutionary variation.
Exactly.
I have to challenge this point a little bit. If the trickster is a low-cost, high-return perturber, how do we make sure the system doesn't just reject the trickster entirely if the perturbation is too disruptive? Where's the social contract that protects him?
The protection lies in how that niche is defined and in the consequences. The trickster often causes trouble, but rarely catastrophic, irreversible destruction.
Okay.
If the trickster causes mass harm, they're not a trickster anymore. They've become the destroyer. But if they only expose, provoke, and disrupt locally, they're tolerated because the system implicitly values the information they provide about its own hidden vulnerabilities and constraints.
They're the system's internal diagnostic tool.
Yes, a very unpredictable one.
Which brings us to the destroyer. If the trickster introduces local chaos, the destroyer ensures that systemic rigidity is dissolved completely. This is Shiva in Hinduism, or a star-going supernova. We often fear the destroyer, but the sources really emphasize its generative, positive function.
It's the fundamental law that old, energy-consuming, rigid patterns must be dissolved for new, higher complexity ones to emerge. The destroyer is transformation, not just an ending.
That sounds almost contradictory to the natural tendency towards stability. How can chaos lead to order mathematically?
By recycling and clearing out resources. Let's map the positive aspects of this destruction. In physics, look at exploding stars, supernovas.
Yeah.
The death of a massive star is unbelievably violent, but that destruction is what synthesizes and then distributes all the heavy elements, carbon, iron, gold, that are necessary for planet formation and ultimately for life.
Energy is released when structures are broken, becoming available for new things to be built.
And in biology, the necessity of death is just. Everywhere, apoptosis programmed cell death is essential for the growth and organization of complex organisms. And then there's the iconic example of the forest fire.
The ecological restart button.
The ultimate ecological restart button. It breaks the rigid energy lock structure of dead wood, it mineralizes nutrients back into the soil, and crucially, some species of seeds require the intense heat of the fire to open their hard casings and begin to germinate.
So destruction isn't just an ending, it's the prerequisite for renewal. It's the release of latent potential.
In psychology, this means old, self-limiting or destructive mindsets must die. The death of the ego for new learning and genuine post-traumatic growth to occur.
And culturally, we see revolutions, economic crashes that clear out inefficient firms, paradigm shifts in science. The destroyer ensures flexibility and prevents the entire system from locking into a non-adaptive, fragile state.
So it completes the cycle. You have order, where the system stabilizes, then stagnation as rigidity sets in, then the destroyer breaks that rigidity.
Which leads to chaos, where resources are freed up.
Then the hero integrates the lessons from that chaos.
And creates a new order.
Consider a narrative example. A small, isolated fishing community that relies entirely on a single, aging dam. The town's economy, its social structure, it's all rigid.
Then a catastrophic earthquake, the destroyer, breaks the dam.
Initially, it's just ruin and chaos. But that forced disruption compels the community to innovate. They have to build a new, modern water control system, diversify their energy sources, rebuild connections with the outside world for aid.
The destruction enabled greater complexity, resilience, and connectivity.
It forced an evolutionary leap.
Okay, so it's clear the hero, trickster, and destroyer drive that core system cycle. They provide the engine for adaptation. But that cycle must require maintenance, specialized support functions.
It does.
So now we need to dive deep into the rest of the supporting cast. These are the crucial network components that enable the whole transformation cycle to work reliably. We have what? 15 of these structural roles to explore?
At least. And we need to understand the precise systemic function of each one.
All right, let's start with the mentor, stabilizer, and information channel.
The mentor's function is not just to give good advice. Systemically, they are an efficient information channel. They reduce uncertainty, and they transfer compressed experience.
To help the hero, the system, reach a better attractor state efficiently and with minimal error, they're the shortcut to avoiding high-cost, high-risk exploration.
Cross-domain, they map precisely to control systems or regulators in engineering, which stabilize a process by constantly providing corrective feedback.
And networks.
They're the high-connectivity hub nodes in complex networks. They drastically reduce the path length needed for a novice node to acquire essential information.
In biology, this is social learning from older, more experienced organisms. It prevents the young ones from having to rediscover every survival rule through, painful trial and error.
The generative rule is pure economics of knowledge. The mentor role arises because borrowing validated expertise is just vastly cheaper, faster, and less risky than independent rediscovery.
Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda are high-efficiency mechanisms designed to drastically reduce Luke Skywalker's error rate.
And to accelerate his convergence to the Jedi Master attractor state.
Okay, next. The gatekeeper. The threshold and filter.
The gatekeeper is the essential barrier. Their job is to test the system and select which paths are worthy of reaching the next level.
They're the resistance that builds strength.
Functionally, the gatekeeper is a resource filter. They protect system resources or status or knowledge from being wasted on systems or heroes that aren't robust enough to handle them yet.
This maps to the energy barriers in physics that must be overcome with activation energy to start a reaction.
Or in evolution, they're the selection filters, the environmental pressures that weed out less fit mutations. In algorithms, they're the conditional if-else rules that determine which branch the program takes next.
So what's the generative rule for the gatekeeper?
It's based on resource protection and investment. If resources or status are limited, if the hero needs access to a dangerous high-value asset, then filters emerge to guarantee investment and competence.
The tests of worthiness in Harry Potter, or the requirements for an initiation rite, they guarantee that the person who passes has the discipline and commitment to wield that future power responsibly.
Exactly. Next, a really fascinating one. The shadow.
The complementary reflection and duality. This is what the hero fears or denies about themselves, but it often holds hidden potential, or at least a crucial counterbalance.
The shadow is repressed potential. Cross-domain, it is the antiparticle in physics, identical to the particle in mass, but opposite in charge. It's the recessive gene in biology, present in the genotype, but not expressed in the phenotype.
It's what is suppressed but stored as latent information. So if the system, the hero, focuses exclusively on one positive path, say order and light, the shadow is the necessary suppression of chaos and darkness.
And the generative rule is so interesting. When a system suppresses a powerful attribute, maybe due to high moral or social cost, that attribute isn't destroyed. It's stored as potential energy.
And that potential can manifest later, often in an amplified, sometimes dangerous form if the suppression becomes unstable.
Darth Vader is the ultimate example. The rejected genius and shadow of Anakin Skywalker, representing the immense power and creativity that was corrupted by fear and subsequent repression.
Okay, a more straightforward one. The ally. The cooperative node in redundancy.
The ally is the crucial cooperative node. Their systemic function is to reduce individual risk and increase the system's capacity through cooperation and complementary skills. They introduce redundancy.
This maps directly to symbiosis in ecology, right? Where two organisms cooperate for mutual survival benefit.
Or in tech systems, they're the redundancy protocols, the backup nodes in a network that ensure if the main path fails, the whole system doesn't crash.
And in psychology, they're the social support structures that mitigate an individual's stress during that trial phase.
The generative rule for the ally is coalition building. Cooperation becomes advantageous whenever a task requires more resources or risk sharing than a single actor can provide.
Samwise Gamgee enables Frodo to complete the quest. Not because Sam is the main actor, but because he provides the essential support capacity and risk mitigation that Frodo, as the primary carrier, lacks.
He is the redundancy node. He's the backup system.
Perfect. Next up, the creator, the combinatorial generator.
The creator is the agent of emergence. Their function is to build new elements and possibilities by combining existing components according to simple generative rules. They are the structural innovators.
So they don't just find new territory like the explorer. They build new territory from existing parts.
Exactly. We see this in DNA, which acts as a generative grammar system for life, combining four simple bases into infinite complexity. We see it in modular composition in design and engineering. The creator takes existing nodes and generates a new functional node.
And the generative rule is that systems will favor innovation when novel combinations of existing components can yield a high return.
They are the agents whose job it is to test the combinatorial possibility space. Tony Stark, the ultimate creator, is constantly combining existing tech and materials in novel ways, sometimes chaotic, often brilliant, to solve problems that require things that haven't been invented yet.
All right, from the innovator to the stabilizer, the ruler, the centralized control mechanism.
The ruler's function is purely structural. It's about organizing the system, setting internal structure, and minimizing internal friction through hierarchy and rules. They enforce the stability of A0 or A1.
They're the central nervous system of the narrative, designed for efficient coordination.
They map to dominance hierarchies in animal groups, which minimize lethal conflict and energy spent on territorial disputes.
Right.
They're the central servers in distributed computer systems, ensuring all the nodes are synchronized.
And they are the executive function in our own cognition, suppressing distractions to maintain focus on a goal.
Their generative rule is efficiency derived from size. As a system's complexity and coordination costs increase, centralized control becomes advantageous for maintaining order and minimizing chaos. King T'Challa, balancing tradition, defense, and innovation in Wakanda, is a perfect example of the ruler as a mechanism of systemic coordination.
Okay, now the caregiver, the stabilizing redistribution. How is this different from the mentor?
The caregiver's function is distinct. They protect, support, and mitigate risk and damage within the system. They're the stabilizing redistribution mechanism. They ensure resource flow minimizes internal stress.
So this maps to parental care and altruism in biology, or welfare and insurance systems in society.
Yes, or the negative feedback loops in control systems that reduce fluctuation and bring the system back toward its set point when internal stress starts to rise.
So what's the generative rule? Why does this role emerge?
Caregiving roles are evolutionarily and socially profitable because they increase the survival rate and loyalty within the community through active risk mitigation. They increase the system's resilience against internal shocks. They ensure that local failures don't become global collapses.
So if the mentor tells you how to fish, the caregiver makes sure you don't starve if you lose your net.
Exactly. One provides knowledge stability, the other provides material and emotional stability or resource resilience.
Now for the rebel, the stochastic destabilizer. This has to be clearly differentiated from the trickster.
It does. The trickster targets the rules for information gain. The rebel initiates structural change by actively opposing an ineffective or unjust system, and they usually have a moral or political mandate.
So the rebel is a stochastic destabilizer acting on the macro scale.
Right. They are the critical social movements or the sudden, overwhelming competitive pressure in ecology that forces a structural collapse of the old order. They create critical phenomena where small, organized opposition can have a cascading, large-scale effect.
The generative rule, then, is moral or practical necessity. The rebel emerges when the cost of maintaining the status quo, usually due to gross inefficiency or injustice, becomes greater than the risk of structural change.
Katniss Everdeen is the perfect example. Her rebellion isn't about random chaos. It's a targeted opposition to a system, the Capitol, that has become unsustainable and morally bankrupt. She is the systemic agent required to force the bifurcation into a new political state.
The wise fool, the ultimate paradox, incongruence as messenger.
They carry profound disruptive insight while appearing strange or silly or inconsequential. And that appearance allows them to bypass the system's normal, rigid filtering mechanisms.
So they use incongruence as a signal that overrides the established filtering protocols.
Cross-domain, they are the paradoxes in math and philosophy that expose the limitations of our current logic. In physics, they're the anomalous observations that defy the current model and eventually lead to an entirely new theory.
So the fool is the system's way of circumventing its own cognitive rigidity.
The generative rule is adaptive communication under rigid constraints. When established cultural or cognitive channels filter out valuable but unusual information, wisdom gets packaged as foolishness or absurdity to avoid normative resistance and actually be heard.
Forrest Gump comes to mind. An eccentric figure whose seemingly simple statements often convey profound truths that more sophisticated characters miss.
A perfect example, now for a very efficient one. The dual role.
Conserved duality or superposition. This is Fascinating. The same unit filling two competing, sometimes contradictory functions depending entirely on the context.
It's high-efficiency resource utilization. Cross-domain, this is polyphenism in biology, where the same genotype yields wildly different phenotypes based on environmental triggers. A single organism can be a worker or a queen, depending on its diet.
And narratively, it's a quantum-like superposition of identity. Superman and Clark Kent. One person, two fundamentally different structural functions for society.
The generative rule is resource efficiency under constraint. Dual roles are adaptively better than having separate, expensive entities for every single function. It saves costs by utilizing the same resource base for multiple, complementary, or even competing purposes.
And Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde represents the extreme psychological tension inherent in this dual resource allocation.
Absolutely. Then we have the innocent, the baseline prototype.
Often underestimated, but you're saying it's crucial. Their function is to represent the system's ideal or norm, a simple, positive reference point that evokes protection.
They're the reference state, the uncorrupted initial condition.
Okay.
They're the juvenile or dependent stages in biology, flexible and highly adaptive. They're the zero state in a mathematical model, the point from which all deviations are measured.
So what's a generative rule?
Simplicity and safety. A simple, low-complexity default point is essential for quick categorization and communication. It survives because it evokes altruistic behavior and collective protective effort. It binds the community together through a shared sense of vulnerability.
The universal appeal of a small child or an animal in need. They trigger the caregiver response across the entire system.
Right. Then there's the explorer, the exploration operator.
Driven by pure curiosity, their function is constantly seeking new information, new territory, new experience.
To expand the system's possibility space.
This highlights that critical exploration versus exploitation trade-off that's inherent in all decision-making systems. From AI to corporate strategy, do you exploit the resource you know, or do you take a risk to find a potentially better one?
The explorer is the agent dedicated to exploration, and the generative rule dictates that explorers emerge when the potential gain from finding new information from reducing uncertainty exceeds the cost and risk of seeking it. They are vital for long-term system health, ensuring the system avoids the fate of the stagnant order.
Okay, now for a powerfully tragic one, the lost hero, the metastable state.
Yes, this is the system stuck in a suboptimal local maximum. They are the fallen master who still possesses great capacity, but is structurally inefficient on a global scale.
This is the metastable state. In optimization algorithms, it's the local maximum, a point that is stable and better than its immediate surroundings, but it's far from the globally optimal solution.
In psychology, it's stagnation due to trauma or early limited success.
So they are trapped by their own past success.
The generative rule is stability trapping. Short-term success or a traumatic event leads to a configuration that is locally stable but globally suboptimal. Relaunching this powerful system requires a massive input of external energy or a radical destructive restructuring.
Often supplied by the destroyer or an external hero.
This is the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader. Immense potential trapped in a highly destructive yet stable configuration.
And what about the reluctant hero? Latency plus activation.
The reluctant hero embodies potential for transformation that is latent, it exists, but it's currently passive. It requires a strong external trigger to be realized.
This describes a high-capacity system that's just running on a low policy.
Cross-domain. This maps to dormant cells that are activated only by the precise biochemical signal, or the excitation of a physical ground state by an external stimulus. The capacity is there, but the activation energy hasn't been supplied yet.
So the generative rule is cost management.
Exactly. When capacity is available but the cost of acting is high, a trigger, a crisis, an emergency, the intervention of the mentor is needed to push the system over that threshold. The story of Bilbo Baggins being forced into adventure is the classic narrative of latent capacity activated by the necessity of an immediate crisis.
Wait, I see an additional role here in the sources, one that acts as a kind of final synthesis or refinement agent. It's related to the creator, but it's focused on execution and maintenance, not just pure invention.
Yes, let's call this final role the engineer or the builder. While the creator focuses on combining elements to generate novelty, the prototype, the engineer focuses on combining elements to achieve reliability and scale, the finished infrastructure.
So the creator provides the blueprint for the new attractor, but the engineer ensures the system settles into that attractor stably and can actually maintain it.
Functionally, the engineer translates chaotic or brilliant prototypes into robust, repeatable, and scalable systems. Cross-domain, this is the difference between a scientific breakthrough and a mature, mass-produced technology.
Or the mechanism of homeostasis in biology, maintaining the optimal, stable internal state against external noise.
And the generative rule here is that once an adaptive pattern is found by the hero or the creator, a dedicated mechanism is required to stabilize, refine, and maintain that pattern long-term to maximize its utility across the system. They are the workers who maintain the new order.
This realization that our stories are simply human names for universal structural patterns, attractors, symmetries, conserved fields of meaning is profoundly unifying. But how do all these different structural roles relate to each other in terms of scale?
It's maybe the most compelling evidence for the universality of these archetypes. They are scale invariant.
Meaning, the same fundamental structure repeats itself under scaling transformations. It's a core indicator of fractal organization in nature.
So the entire hero's journey applies equally to vastly different levels of reality.
You see the same pattern at the microscale. An individual's personal journey through, I don't know, learning a new language or mastering a complex skill.
Right. The struggle, the failure, and the ultimate integration of new knowledge, it's all there.
And at the mesoscale.
A local ritual, a small startup team's dynamic as they pivot away from a failed product, or a specific political crisis within a single city.
And at the macro scale, an epical cultural shift, the rise and fall of entire civilizations, or a global revolution in scientific thought, a paradigm shift.
The structure is the same, order to chaos to new order. This fractal recurrence shows that these archetypes are not arbitrary cultural constructs. They are manifestations of universal systemic laws.
This is the critical moment for you, the listener. How do we take this incredibly complex systems framework and actually apply it? How can we use it to analyze a novel, a historical event, a piece of art, or a business shift? We need actionable, high-level tools for identification.
We have 5 tools derived directly from the system's perspective that let you analyze any complex system. First, map it as a graph.
Okay, so stop viewing a mythic theme or a historical sequence as linear text.
View it as a network or a graph. The nodes are the elements or motifs, the specific characters, events, resources. The edges are the relationships or the frequent sequences between them. Look for the most frequent, shortest path sequences.
Those are your candidate archetypes, your powerful attractors.
Second, identify the invariants. Ask yourself, what in this story or this system must be present for the meaning or function to hold? If you remove the mentor, does the hero still succeed in the same way, or does the error rate drastically increase?
That necessary non-negotiable element is the conservation law of the system, the preserved meaning, M.
Third, test robustness through perturbation. Mentally perturb the system or the narrative. Remove an ally. Change the trigger. Introduce a massive shock, a new destroyer.
And see what collapses, what's fragile, and what core structural elements remain unchanged.
The structure that persists is the archetype.
Fourth, look for symmetry breaking.
Define a baseline expectation, the symmetry for the system. This could be the expected distribution of resources or power or roles. Then identify the elements, like the trickster, the rebel, or the creator, that systematically deviate to create innovation or structural change. This is how you locate the sources of nonlinear novelty.
And finally, fifth, identify attractors and bifurcations.
View narratives as dynamic paths in a phase space. Identify the stable endpoints, the attractors, like the New Order, the Golden Age, or the integrated self. And then identify the critical events, the bifurcations, that force a transition between those stable states.
And those bifurcations are the moments when the system is most sensitive to small changes, and therefore the most interesting parts of the story or the history.
Exactly.
So, what does this all mean? We began by asking what links a particle physics experiment to the story of Luke Skywalker, and the answer we've uncovered is, well, it's a stunning testament to the unity of structural complexity.
The core insight is that archetypes are not simply culturally arbitrary. They are the emergent, self-organizing manifestations of universal structures found in all complex systems. Attractors, symmetries, conserved fields of meaning, and adaptive feedback processes.
And by using the language of dynamic systems, even simplified like this, we gain the power of translation. We can translate cultural observations into cross-disciplinary models, and we can go the other way too.
We can recognize that the hero is simply the human name for the universal algorithm of learning and adaptation, and the destroyer is the necessary engine of entropy and recycling.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought for you to take away.
If our myths are just human names for natural laws, If the story of the creator is simply the combinatorial principle in action, and the reluctant hero is the activation of latent potential, what new mathematical or biological hypotheses could we generate by simply studying our favorite films, classic literature, and historical cycles?
If the great storytellers have been modeling universal system behavior for millennia, perhaps the next great scientific breakthrough is hidden in the patterns of your favorite fiction.
Something to think about.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive. Thanks for joining us.